One day I'm going to win the lottery.
Well, hi, I love playing scratch cards.
Hi, so I've been playing the Powerball lottery for a couple of years now.
Hola, mi número de la suerte es el número 11.
Hola, algún día espero ganar el premio mayor de la lotería.
Hola, algún día voy a ganar la lotería.
Hello, I wish one day I can become a millionaire.
Hola, es divertido jugar la lotería.
Dzień dobry. Gram w Totka 3 razy w tygodniu.
Ciao, un giorno vincerò il Super Enalotto.
Okay, our first subject, our first experiment is routines. Now, behavioral science, a routine, I understand, is what happens, it's defined as what happens when we perform even complex activities on kind of automatic mode. And we wanted to ask the experts to look into this to help you all to look under the hood when lottery players react to the kind of disruption that we have all experienced over the last year, and how those behaviors have changed and how they might change again, and what drives that. But really from the bottom up, or actually more from the inside out. So to get us started with our little experiment, actually, I would like to ask all of you a question. Here it is. It's a question about a topic which is somehow, it turns out, to be incredibly important to behavioral science, which is the consumption of popcorn, which is why we sent you some in your pack. Feel free to open and enjoy it. And whilst you're doing that, look at this question. Don't think too hard about your answer. There is no right answer, and it's definitely not a trick question. Just, we want to know, what's the first thing which comes into your head? I promise it really will all make sense in a minute. There is actually a direct relationship between popcorn and lottery purchases, which might surprise you. Anyway, but whilst you're not thinking about it and thinking about popcorn, let's hear from a few of the players who we asked to tell us about their lottery routines and rituals.
So I think I equate playing the lottery with road trips. It's been several years, and it's not that often, but usually when I'm driving in the car and stop at a gas station.
Oh, so I think I play now when I see advertisements on TVs. Usually that's what kind of jogs my memory and makes me think, oh, I want to go buy a lottery ticket. So I guess sometimes, yeah, when I see it on TV or I hear it on the radio, then I feel inclined to buy them. So I only strictly buy lottery tickets, mostly at the gas station, because usually it's the quickest place to get it. I don't typically like buying it in a grocery store just because, I don't know, I'm there for food, not necessarily to play lotteries. So
No solo juego a la lotería en ocasiones especiales como Navidad, sino que también hay veces en el año que paso por los kioscos de lotería y decido comprar un ticket.
I definitely want to do that. I haven't got to that point yet, but I think that would be fun. Have my habits changed since the pandemic? No, not really, because like I said, things are opening up a little bit more. So yeah, I pop in the store here and there. It's almost back to normal here. Yeah, so I didn't really change up anything between how often I was purchasing games or the type of games I was playing since the pandemic. Yeah, so it's stayed about the same.
No he cambiado mis hábitos de juego, aunque durante la pandemia se cerraron todo, o sea, entonces no podía jugar. Entonces, por mucho tiempo, durante 8 meses estuvo todo cerrado y no pude jugar. Cuando regresó ya seguí con mis mismos hábitos de jugar 2 veces a la semana.
Casi siempre era en el supermercado, en la caja del supermercado. Bueno, ahora visito las tiendas o los supermercados mucho menos que antes, por lo tanto juego mucho menos que antes. Voy a quedarme con la nueva rutina que tengo para jugar. Quizás en algún momento volveré atrás solo por diversión a comprar un ticket, pero yo creo que jugando online es más fácil y tengo más posibilidades de ganar. significa que algún día voy a ser el afortunado ganador.
Well, what I love about all those, and that's just a selection of all of the interviews that we had, is how clearly people realize their lottery play is driven or fits into their routines. So, Owain, join the dots for us between popcorn, lottery tickets, and people's daily routines.
Well, thanks, Charles. I think in order to join the dots, you have to step back a little bit and think about what's going on cognitively in the minds of individuals when we're taking any kind of decision, really. Behavioral scientists, who, as you were rightly pointing out, study human behavior, which is to say, we look at what people do, how we make choices, how we take decisions. And we usually make a distinction between two different systems and processes that we use for taking decisions and processing information. So all of us, we have a fast system and a slow system. And the fast system is at play most of the time. It enables us to make most decisions in our everyday lives, and that's the system that is at play. If somebody says to you, what is 1 + 1, a number will almost automatically pop into your mind, whether you want it to or not. That's your fast system at play. It happens automatically, happens without your conscious thought and attention. And if you contrast that with what happens if somebody says to you, Charles, what is 13 × 17? I assume a number will not pop into your head. You'll have to actively think about it. You'll have to reflect and almost stop other activities in order to work out what the answer to that question might be. Now, this sounds a little bit abstract, but the reality is that most of the time we are operating in this fast automatic system, and that's good for us as human beings because it enables us to take lots of decisions all of the time. When you relate this back to our everyday practices and the routines of our everyday lives, what you find is that routines are effectively defined as being behaviors that we undertake using our automatic system. And the way that these routines become established is by repetition. So routines are marked by 3 different elements. Typically, there will be a trigger. So we heard that from the players that were talking about the moment when they go into a gas station or a supermarket or get some kind of notification through an advert. That triggers the behavior. The behavior might be then purchasing a lottery ticket. And the behavior is often accompanied by some kind of reward, a dopamine hit, which obviously is playing the game itself. And the crucial element that transforms a behavior from your slower thinking reflective system into these automated routines is repetition in a consistent context. And it's that consistency of context that enables those triggers to take place. So you asked me to join the dots between playing a lottery and eating popcorn. Well, we asked you a question, we asked everyone a question about eating popcorn and the locations that individuals associate with that. Well, often when it comes to something like popcorn eating behavior, we associate that with a particular time and a particular place, and for most people that will be a movie theatre. So that's the connection between these disparate elements, and why in some ways it helps to explain something about our everyday lives and practices.
Okay, that's fascinating. So the important thing here, I guess, is to understand that people associate lottery play with particular contexts, and that's how they build it into their routine. Okay. As you know, you're in the business of experimenting on human beings in a nice way. We've got one for you. We've got a winning volunteer who I know a lot of the audience will recognise in the person of Michelle Carney, who's very gamely stepped in to help with this experiment. Good morning, hi, Michelle. How are you?
Good.
Loving the glasses there.
I'm loving these.
Yeah, fantastic.
Today.
Fantastic.
I don't have any popcorn though. You're making me hungry.
Yeah. But you still got your mug, okay? Drink your coffee. Owen, over to you.
Michelle, first up, thanks for being a willing volunteer. It sounds like you do eat popcorn some of the time. Is that right?
Sometimes, not often, but sometimes.
And where do you tend to eat popcorn when you do eat popcorn?
Really only at the movies, at the cinema. Sometimes it's a hard choice between that and the big box of jujubes, but when you walk into the cinema, you have that smell of the popcorn, which really makes me want to eat it when I'm there.
Right. So in some ways, this encapsulates some of the aspects that I was talking about in terms of routinized behavior. You go into the movie theater, the cinema, the smells, the sights entice you into buying popcorn. In behavioral science terms, there's a couple of things going on. One of them is this trigger behavior, the cue and the context, and the other is the wider set of primes that are encouraging you down a particular path. One of the things that I'm quite interested in, though, is that you said it's really only when you're going into a movie theater. So, for example, if you're watching a film at home, you don't eat popcorn. Is that right?
No, never. I never honestly think I've ever thought about it at home.
And if you were in any other context, say if you're watching a movie on a plane, would it ever occur to you even to ask the flight attendant to get you some popcorn?
No. I think the only instance would be if I smelled it, like in the cinema, if you had that smell, if someone's going to pop it for me at home and bring it to me on the couch, maybe, but I would never think about it myself and go pop a bag or ask the flight attendant for one. No.
And Charles mentioned earlier that we're going to be talking about a lot of pieces of research and experiments that have been looking at these different elements. And in this particular field, there are numerous studies on popcorn eating behavior, precisely because it tells us something interesting about these routinized behaviors. And what you find in these studies is that if you take somebody and put them in a different context, so instead of a movie theater, you might take them into another setting where they can still watch a film. The desire to consume popcorn is much reduced, and that's precisely because these cues and these primes and these triggers are absent. And the interesting thing is, we might think, objectively speaking, we choose to eat popcorn because we want to eat popcorn, but actually the environmental cues and the environmental context are the things that are really driving our behaviors and our decisions. So thank you, Michelle, for being such a good sport. And I think you might be willing to join us later for the second and the third sections as well. So we will see you shortly.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Michelle. So Owen, quickly then, just want to make sure I've completely understood this. You're saying that with the popcorn, it's essentially there's a general principle being displayed here that could equally apply to people's lottery behavior.
Yeah, that's right. So what the literature suggests is that these routines, they develop over time through repetition of the behavior. So when it comes to the players, they may be going to the shops in the same context through their daily or their weekly routine. And what starts as that more reflective behavior, the active thought and decision to purchase a lottery ticket, over time becomes much more automated. And it's the repetition. That's why I'm emphasizing this repetition. The repetition in the same context is what kicks into this more automated response to the wider environment.
Okay, fascinating. Thank you. So before we move on, let's have a look and see about our audience's popcorn buying habits. Okay, it's a shame that this isn't an audience that we can't see you, but I would love to know who it is that eats popcorn in the office.
might possibly me.
Okay, I love it. So essentially, we are all, I guess, subject to this principle. Is almost a universal principle, and it's incredibly valuable, I think. So let's dig into it a little bit further. I want to take a slightly different perspective, Noelle, because you've not been looking at popcorn. You've been looking at the wider picture of people's behaviors and routines in the context that actually would influence potentially their lottery buying activity. What have you found out?
Yeah, so we've just received some research back, which we look at consumer trends, overall behaviors and attitudes. So some of these trends may seem familiar to members of the audience. Some of them were featured in the IGT 5 Trends for 2021 report that was released in March. We were out in the field doing the survey at the same time. And true to this topic, one of the things that we found was about 40% of weekly lottery players really prefer to have routines in their lives. So this idea of when I purchase my lottery ticket, where I purchase my lottery ticket is something really ingrained. But the reality is, as Owain talked about triggers that really sort of changed the systems, we had a pandemic, and the pandemic did shift some of our behaviors out of necessity. And sort of 3 of the areas that we really saw this, and these are trends that we are seeing both energized and for the long term, meaning we think they're going to stick and be around for a while. And the first is this idea of a cashless society. We were all told to put our coins and our money away and learn to use contactless cards, use our phones, sort of digital payment systems. People got comfortable with this. They found how easy it was. One of the pieces of our research showed that older generation, the boomer generation, who wasn't that tech savvy, found out how convenient it was, and they really accelerated in terms of percentage of usage. And so even in sort of that general population, 40% of global consumers have used and expect to continue to use some sort of digital payment. So I think for those of you who are retail local shop owners, there's a real opportunity here to create more incentives and convenience for the players to use these contactless forms of payment and point of purchase.
I think, Noelle, on this point, what's really interesting, to go back to the kind of theory around routine formation in the first place, is that what we're starting to see is people who may not have otherwise begun to use some of these new forms of payment and transactions being forced into those behaviours, and those behaviours have become repeated in a consistent context, as I described before, and that would give us some belief that, as people seem to recognise themselves, that those behaviours will continue. So I would definitely expect this to be one of those trends that accelerates going forward.
And I would absolutely agree with that, Owain. I think the next trend also points to this. It's something sort of ongoing in learned behavior, because we all learned how to be entertained at home, how to exercise at home, how to educate at home, how to work at home. Home became our central point of being during the lockdowns. And so a lot of these behaviors are really going to stick in terms of consumers understanding the ease and convenience of things like shopping online or doing video calls with their relatives in another country. We also see this particularly, I know there's been some inquiry around the idea of online lottery playing or digital behaviors during the pandemic. If they accelerated, will they shift? We think that they will. We think that this is something for the long term because people have found the enjoyment of that. And about 70% of frequent lottery players in most of the countries we surveyed felt that they were more likely and said that they expect to either shop online or continue to have these online behaviors versus what they had during the pre-pandemic. So in thinking about a lottery's cashless offerings and everything that you have online, whether it's allowing consumers to check numbers, maybe check on last night's winner, there's a real way to incentivize them and embrace this digital behavior. And it also, yeah?
Sorry, I was just going to come. Sorry, Noelle. I was just going to come in because I think there is one really interesting element to this, which is that I think you're absolutely right in your analysis in terms of the fact that we've almost been disrupted into these new patterns, these new behaviours, but there is the potential for a kind of countervailing force as well, in the sense that there will come a point, hopefully reasonably soon, when lots of businesses around the world face that decision about whether or not they want to encourage people back into the office. And I think there is the chance at that point for the disruptive moment to itself become disrupted, and for some of our old practices to then be reformed. So whereas I think that in relation to things like cashless transactions, those are here to stay, there will be other moments that have the potential to themselves get disrupted back into old practices if we don't play a role in facilitating their continuation.
Yeah, there's the interesting thing, Owen, is when you dive into the data, there's so many different perceptions in terms of acceptance or rejection of that, and or considering where Brazil is with the pandemic right now versus the United States, which is coming out of it, right? Very different mindsets happening right now. The one thing, and this points to sort of the last trend that we are seeing, and I would say that this was really accelerated during the pandemic. It's come down slightly with our new research, but it's no less important, is the idea of investing in your local community. I think people really recognized where they lived and the importance of the mom and pop restaurant, the local bodega owner. I got to know my bodega's cat, Sammy, very well during the pandemic. And it's a relationship that I'm going to continue to take part of and be invested in. So 1 in 5 global consumers expect to kind of continue this, to support, to infuse money, to kind of invest in that local community and the independent businesses that are around there. And I think this is, again, a real opportunity in terms of communicating through marketing or communications. What is the, playing the lottery, what kind of support that gives to the community, what kind of support that gives to your local independent business owner, and keeps Sammy well fed with the kitty nibbles from his local bodega owner. So I do think that local is another really strong point of identity marker for people.
I think one of the really interesting elements of this is, in behavioral science terms, is the importance of the social components in our behaviors. All of us, we're embedded within social networks. We're influenced by what other people around us are doing, and the fact that a lot of these behaviors require that kind of face-to-face element of it is no surprise. So yeah, I agree with that in terms of the potential for that particular trend to be maintained.
I would absolutely agree with that. New relationships have definitely been formed.
Mm-hmm. Owen, is there anything in the literature to help people understand how long it takes for new behaviors to stick? I mean, I know it's a very, very broad question, and you probably can't answer it precisely, but have there been any other sort of disruptive activity events that have been studied before that might give us a few pointers to what might happen next? Yeah.
So it's a really great question, and you will find, if you do a bit of Googling, there's some people claim to know that there is a particular number of repetitions of a behavior that will result in it becoming a routine. But those people haven't really engaged widely with the literature, and the numbers tend to be based on averages of studies as opposed to what actually happens for most of us in practice. So what you tend to find, and I think a better way of thinking about this is to just say that it's about the number of times that you might repeat a behavior, and the more that behavior becomes repeated in a consistent context, the more likely it is to stick, which is why it's of significance that this period has gone on for so long. If we'd have just been in it for a few weeks, we wouldn't have expected some of the trends that Noelle was just talking about to stick in a way that I think we can start to think about now, precisely because they have been repeated again and again and again, and have therefore been more likely to turn into routines. So that's sort of one element to it. But yeah, there are of course lots of studies that show what happens when these routines get disrupted. And this is why I think we need to be a little bit cautious about exactly what's going to happen when some working practices start to return to something that looks a little bit more like the pre-COVID practices. So one of my favourite studies in this area looks at what happened in London when underground train drivers went on strike. So there are millions of people that use the London Underground network every day, and what happened was, on this one day, 6 million people needed to find new ways of travelling to work, and those individuals, some of them would have gone by bike, some of them would have walked, some of them would have gone by bus. What happened was that a percentage of them, about 5% of them, never went back to the tube, never went back to using the underground again. And the interesting insight here, which does have lessons in terms of what's happening with the around the pandemic, is that those people never bothered to find alternative ways of going to work before, but as a result of the disruption of that routine, they were forced into thinking about a more optimal strategy of getting to work for the first time. So that's why I say there is no number. It might just be one occasion of disruption, but more likely it's about this repetition in a consistent context that allows these new behaviours to form over time.
Okay, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you. So I think if I understand this correctly, essentially the pandemic hasn't changed the fundamental mechanisms here. Well, obviously it hasn't, because we're the human beings, we're the same human beings that we were 12 months ago. Feels like 12 years ago. Well, essentially we have cues, we have repeat behavior, and that's how we automate these things. But what might have changed for some people is the contexts in which that's happening, and therefore their exposure to some of those prompts or those cues. And so if they're not receiving those prompts, then that may well impact on their lottery buying behavior, just in the same way that I imagine if Michelle walked into the movie theater and didn't smell the popcorn, she may be actually less likely to go and buy some.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. We're kind of at the end of this section. I want to move on. But I've been taking a few notes, so if we could just pull up slide 3, thanks. Just want to try to summarize for everybody in the audience a few points that might be worth consideration afterwards. The first is really to examine whether players' routines, their daily life routines, are becoming more local, because it seems that those are the ones that are the most likely to stick, because those are the ones that have had the most repeat over the last year. And of course, that could profoundly impact where they play lottery, where they receive their prompts. You know, if they're not driving down the freeway, they're not seeing the billboards with the big numbers on them, they may well not think about going to play the lottery. So that's quite an interesting one. Second is, what are the new prompts to purchase lottery? So if people aren't in the same places, experiencing the same media, meeting the same people, seeing the same things, what are they seeing and what are they hearing, and where are we going to be able to put those cues to remind them to go play lottery? Because it can be very different, and we just don't really know at this point how different those are, but we're going to need to find them. And the last thing is going back to Noelle's point, I thought was incredibly powerful, and it's actually maybe underestimated, is this switch from paper coins to cashless. It's been coming for a long time. It's accelerated enormously during the pandemic. And of course, what does that mean? It means that if people can't buy their lottery tickets in a comfortable way that works with all the other things that they're buying at the same time, that could actually have a dramatic and immediate impact on lottery, and vice versa, which is actually, you might find that some resistance that you felt a year or so ago to digital purchasing of instance from a vending machine, for example, may well have gone away. And now's the time to look at it, because as people, I think, seem to be open to forming new routines and responding to these new cues, is actually tremendous opportunity for you all. So fantastic.